This video is based on the real concerns of our friend who went to China. A man who is critical of slogans about a superstate who understands the mechanisms of propaganda very well suddenly became either proud or homesick of everything Russian there in China. He has felt for himself all the stages of the emigrants' feelings towards their homeland. At the first stage, I was looking at the local sites and muttering, "Blimey, they've got it all worked out here, not like us." I remembered the homeland I had left behind, if not with a grudge, but with a cold feeling, and I gloated to those left behind. In the second stage, I was noticing the flaws of the social life I found myself in. Surprisingly, I realized that in some ways my homeland was better, at least it was more familiar. And then came the third stage, the most dramatic. Here and there I began to have visions of lovely birch trees. It seemed that I was not well at all, because I was homesick. All the things I had recently dreamed of leaving in the past irrevocably. The potholes, the shabby stops, the scorched buttons in the elevator. I just missed all that. In my mind, I was comparing the frail local people to our Russian folk hero Ivan, whom until recently I wanted nothing to do with. But this is not the latest stage. When during a trip to the Yellow Sea, a Chinese man asked me, "Don't you have a sea there in Russia?" I frantically went on to list all the Russian seas I had scraped together from my geography class, and in the end, having come up with nothing better, I blurted out, "And now we have Crimea, too." It was then that I realized that something terrible was happening to me. How do you get certain people to go with pitchforks on others? What processes are triggered in the brain when we see fellow men and outsiders? What does the portrait of the most patriotic personalities look like? And why what we call patriotism is actually in-group favoritism? There was a Polish psychologist, Henri Teufel. He studied the nature of such things as social prejudices and stereotypes, so in the 70s he did another of his experiments. He divided the students into two groups. He formed the groups completely randomly, but that's not what he told the students. Each of the participants thought they had been selected for their group on the basis of a certain vitally important criteria. For example, by their ability to evaluate the number of dots in a picture, or by their preference for abstract art. Even if the participants in one group were acquainted with members of the other group and had never seen members of their own group before, the subjects of the experiment exhibited the same pattern of behavior during the interaction, acting in favor of members of their group and oppressing those who were in the other faction, even though neither of their actions were of direct personal benefit to them. Do you know what this means? It is not necessary to have irreconcilable differences or conflicts over limited resources. It is enough for someone to draw an arbitrary line. This one is on your side and this one is on someone else's. And before you know it, the person opposite to you will start to turn into a dangerous enemy, or at least an unpleasant fellow. Here you are looking at in-group favoritism and its opposite, out-group negativity. The phenomena as old as the world itself. But why would I, you might ask? Why would I change my attitude towards someone just because we were randomly assigned to different groups? But you do that. You do that all the time, whether you want to or not. Think about it. Where does this wave of friendliness come from when you find out that your new acquaintance is, no, not a fellow countryman, not even a colleague, but a namesake? For a second, you'll see him as almost a blood brother, a twin, and just a beautiful person. It turns out we're namesakes. How much is behind that phrase? You're not just two strangers, you belong to the same closed society of Michaels, the only members of which are destined to appreciate the beauty and secret meaning of that name. Or let's say in a new company a conversation about hockey breaks out, and it turns out that 2 are rooting for the Washington Capitals and the other 2 are rooting for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Again, the question is, why would you do that? Why would your attitude towards these people change? Unaccountably, not dramatically, but it does. And why do you see that guy in the navy red hat as a long-lost blood brother, while these 2 jackasses are now less trustworthy than they were a second ago? As in Teufel's experiment, the criteria for separation are as arbitrary and immaterial as possible. Hockey preferences are not influenced by education, social status, or occupation. Geographical proximity has nothing to do with it either. All 4 of them are practically from the same street. As a rule, a choice of favourites in sports is conditioned by family continuity. My grandfather supported them, my father supported them, and now I support them. Our whole family's like that. Or in general, by sheer randomness. It's just a matter of taste. But the hockey fan fights are a clear indication that some take these differences to heart very closely. But the amazing thing is that the willingness to divide people into insiders and outsiders is embedded in our brains. Another social psychologist, J. van Bevel, now in modern times inspired by Teufel's work, decided to look into our brains. He divided the volunteers into 2 groups following the principle of strict randomness. Then, when in-groups and out-groups were identified, the subjects underwent an fMRI scanning, during which they began to look at photographs of the other participants in the experiment. When they saw the face of someone friendly, there was a burst of activity in the amygdala, an ancient brain area that plays an important role in social interaction and the formation of emotional connections. This was despite the fact that they had only been part of the group for a few minutes. In addition, Van Bevel found out that when the participants viewed the photographs and saw their in-groups, there was increased activity in the facial recognition area of the brain, as well as in the prefrontal cortex, which deals with the emotional component of moral and ethical judgments. So, here's a simple sign you can use to tell if a person thinks you're one of them. Just look at their amygdala. If its activity increases when they meet you, it's okay. They can be trusted. In another similar experiment, Red Sox fans took sadistic pleasure in watching the Yankees, their arch-enemies, get beaten by another team, the Orioles, even though the Yankees' loss wouldn't affect their beloved team's success. All that mattered was that their enemies were screwed, for which the subjects were constantly rewarded with a dopamine shot. In other words, in order to achieve patriotic ecstasy, it is not enough to just have your own in-group people around, you also need out-groups somewhere else. And if we zoom out and move from the realm of sports confrontations to the geopolitical map, we're confronted with the phenomenon of the external enemy, or anti-ideologies. This is one of the filters of propaganda within Noam Chomsky's theory of mass media, according to which, in short, the media should not be trusted. It turns out that this was clear as far back as 1988. The external enemy is a figure designed to generate feelings of anxiety and danger. In its shadow, the individual feels small and weak and clings to a group that is able to provide security and protection. And if this separation is not just insider and outsider, but insider and outsider who competes with us for limited resources, then intra-group bonds grow stronger. Let's say you live in a mythical country called Aesir. You turn on your TV screen and what happens? Did you get the wrong channel? They keep on and on about some republic called Eniaku, which you have nothing to do with at all. You don't even have relatives there, but your screen is buzzing on and on about it from morning till night, every day with short breaks for holidays. It's fine, there's no malfunction, it's just that Eniaku serves as the external enemy that the citizens need to be constantly reminded of. But why are we ranting about some mythical lands, right? Let's talk about something real, Russia. Ever since the Grand Country has annexed Crimea, There have been an increasing number of references to some external enemy in the media and in speeches from the state. This devilish entity is always breathing down our necks. It's posing a threat to security of the motherland. It's interfering in domestic politics, trying to undermine the integrity of the country. This evil is so distant, yet so close, right at our border. That some external enemy was Ukraine, or rather the US that has always wanted to deploy their troops and arms on the Ukrainian soil. The seed of an idea that there is an adversary from outside somewhere there has been planted into the heads of Russian patriots long ago, and it is bearing the fruit. According to the independent public opinion research organization Levada Center, this is how Russians have been feeling about the United States for about 20 years. You can see for yourself where the breaking point instantly occurred, right at the time of Crimea annexation. Same goes for the Europe and Ukraine itself. But we need to point out who is the primary audience of such propaganda moves: the layman. Remember, we talked about and characterized them in our video about the ambiguity and complexity of the situation with the war in Ukraine. Moreover, the similar description of this category of Russian people has been expressed by Lev Gudkov, the academic supervisor of the Levada Center, when he spoke of people's sentiments about the ongoing war in Ukraine. This war is mainly supported by people who are less educated, the elderly, residents of villages and small and medium-sized towns. This is the social periphery of people, dependent on official channels of information, first and foremost on television, which has generally become an instrument of aggressive false demagogy and propaganda. So, how else could it all be? If there are no formidable outsiders left in the world, why the hell would you need your insiders? Speaking of the war in Ukraine, since Putin had invaded our Slav brothers, we've been robbed of any means of monetization on our Russian channel. We can no longer use it as the main source of income, so we are fully committed to the English channel from now on. It would be great if you could share this video with your friends. It'd help us a lot in the current situation. Thank you, and let's move on. Feelings of anxiety, defenselessness, insecurity play a huge role in the desire to merge with a larger entity. We talked about it in our old video where we discussed the popular analogies with which people compare a pandemic, a hurricane, the flu, and most importantly, war. There also was an answer to why such popular analogies are wrong. There'll be a link in the description just below. Let's add more credible people to our story of in-group favoritism. Meet Ari Kruglansky, a social psychologist who studies people's motives and judgment. He's come to conclusions you're not going to like. On second thought, why aren't you going to like it? It's not about you, after all, as usual. Using examples from countries like Egypt, Pakistan, and Indonesia, he found a curious correlation. The less satisfied an individual is with himself as an individual, the more personal defeats he experiences, the weaker his confidence in his own reality is, the more strongly he identifies with his national or religious community. In other words, if you've messed up in a personal role or simply have been unlucky, just adopt a different, more powerful and successful identity. And the group has to be necessarily successful for the individual to want to identify with it. Otherwise, what's the point? To change the role of the individual loser to the role of a loser club member. There's this widely known phenomenon of basking in reflected glory. A series of experiments have shown that people are more likely to use the pronoun we when talking about their favorite team winning. We did them! But if the team was defeated, it's, they blew it. Got nothing to do with me, fucking cripples they are. The weak are always looking for the strong to merge with them. And now you're not just some Joel Cooper, an alcoholic and a deadbeat with a universal uncertainty about who to borrow some cash from until the end of the month, but a citizen of the superstate that everyone has to reckon with and respect. Speaking of uncertainty, personal failures undermine the certainty and confidence in the concept of self. Perhaps this is why the victims of various cults and radical formations are people who are socially and economically vulnerable, often young people with an unformed, not-so-complete worldview and self-perception who do not understand who they are and where they are headed. The group will give them a ready-made, clear ideology and place in the world, answering all their questions. And any human being's whole life is about categorizing the reality around them, breaking it down into even rows. Otherwise, they would simply choke in its diversity and ambiguity. This is good, and that is bad. This is cool, and that's just no biggie. Here are insiders, there are outsiders. And once they have found their place in the world, once they have associated themselves with a certain group, they will do anything to prove the superiority of that group and their position, first and foremost, to themselves. The reason is not just that every cook praises their own broth. Take this group away from a person and you break their whole picture of the world. They would lose their place in it. They would not be able to define themselves. They would not be able to answer the question, who am I? One of my neighbors is still struggling to recover from the collapse of the Soviets. He says his country was taken away from him. But as you can already see, the main thing that was taken away from them was their own identity. Former personal identity, impossible to exist in an environment other than that one. Psychologists have even coined a special name for our need for a sense of certainty about the world around us: cognitive closure. What is it? So, this is you, and you are faced with a situation that you have to relate to and deal with in some way. Perhaps it's a specific question that you are looking for an answer to. Sometimes the question is simple and unambiguous, like 2 times 2. But what if you're faced with a question where you can't answer yes or no? Well, for example, who I am and why I live. Ambiguity in itself scares the shit out of an already weak psyche. You want to escape from it and come to definitive conclusions, even irrational ones at times. If you find it difficult to find the answer yourself, you may be prompted by political or religious doctrines, despite how absurd they might be. If you want to, you can believe in worse than that. And do you know what the main uncertainty in everyone's mind is related to? Their mortality. The eternal question, what's it all for if we die? And will we die? After all, the consciousness of even the most seasoned materialist secretly hopes for immortality and does not believe that the light will ever fade for him. Group identity can remove the contradiction of the meaninglessness of our actions at the inevitable end. As an individual, you are fragile and mortal. It can't be helped. But the group which you are part of will remain after you, and you can dedicate yourself to make it even more powerful and invulnerable and stay in memory of its members, dissolve in ranks of its faithful servants and prolong its earthly life for some centuries more. Essentially, during patriotic or simply in-group ecstasy, the boundaries between the personal self and the group self are blurred. In this moment, an entirely different self is born. A kind of above self. Huge and invincible, VENOM. There is no longer a separate, weak and defenseless I, but there is we. This feeling can be reinforced by a unified look that erases personal differences, like fan merch or military uniforms. But the main symbol of the dissolution of the personal self into the sea of the collective is, of course, the mask. It guarantees complete depersonalization of the acting person and removes all personal responsibility from their shoulders, and you can be sure of that. When at the next protest some fully equipped fella Ivan, a father of 2 cute kids and a sweet son, will rub his rubber baton over your head with pleasure, you shouldn't complain that, what kind of beasts they are recruiting into the forces? He did not act on his own behalf. his hand was guided by an impersonal mechanism of state oppression. It's just that all people are divided into insiders and outsiders, and in this experiment, you were in different groups. Patriotism. In appropriate doses, it is useful. It is a sense of helping hand presence, of being united for a common purpose, of a fine-tuned mutual understanding. Human is a social creature. Their best achievements have been made possible through coordinated action, and the most inaccessible peaks have been conquered in a burst of devotion to one another and to a common cause. But if the dose is overshot, you get chauvinism, unreasonable aggression, the dissolution of boundaries between yourself and the crowd, mindless following after the majority. It's when your consciousness is replaced by a collective consciousness and you are evicted from your own head. And if someone is deliberately turning up the heat and increasing the dosage by creating effigies of external and internal enemies, it is important to recognize it in time and not to let it influence the program implanted in your head that's called in-group favoritism, widely known as patriotism. Man has already managed to spot a lot of bugs in his system. Many of the things that have helped us survive have been built too hastily and carelessly, resulting in terrible side effects. There you go. Now you know about the bugs in your operating system. You know that the habit of dividing people into insiders and outsiders is deeply embedded in the brain, and often it doesn't even need a reason to do so. You know that there are tricks to activate patriotic and nationalist sentiments, including some that are completely nefarious. You know that the greatest group dependency is shown by vulnerable and insecure individuals, that group beliefs have a powerful hypnotic effect. It seems to the individual that by abandoning their beliefs, they are abandoning their worldview, their self. You know all that now. But what do you do with this information, and will you be able to hack into the system? That's a question for you. That's up to you, and no one can answer it for you. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. Perhaps together you'll find the answer to this question, as a group, so to speak. On this note, we would like to especially thank our supporters on Patreon. You make our gloomy days shine brighter. May you not be consumed by in-group favoritism and have faithful friends around you who are willing to accept different points of view. And I'm the researcher.